You're listening to the Alpha's Love Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. The silence in my own mind was the first thing I noticed. It was a profound, echoing hollow, a cavern I had wandered for as long as I could remember. They called me Elara the Broken, the Alpha's daughter with no wolf, no spirit, no voice in the chorus of the pack. My world was one of muted colors and distant howls, a life lived on the other side of a thick glass pane. I could see them, my father's people, their souls intertwined with their beasts, but I could never touch that world. I was alone, utterly, completely alone, until the day I wasn't. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a pressure, a presence, vast and powerful and utterly alien, suddenly blooming inside my head like a second heart. It carried the scent of pine and cold stone, the feel of ancient power, the taste of a king's command, and then a voice, not heard with my ears, but felt in the very marrow of my bones. It was a voice of thunder and authority. A voice that expected to be obeyed. "Luna, where are you? The bond is faint, I cannot see you." I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my paintbrush poised over a half-finished canvas depicting the lonely moon. Trembled in my hand. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. This was the madness they whispered about, finally claiming me. The loneliness had fractured my sanity. The voice came again, sharper now, edged with a flicker of frustration. "Answer me." "I feel your presence. A flicker of light in the dark. Why do you hide from your mate?" Mate? My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was a mind link. I'd read about them, dreamed of them in my most secret, shameful dreams. But this was wrong. This voice wasn't for me. It was searching for someone else, and it had gotten terribly, terribly lost. I should have stayed silent. I should have let the king's call fade into the static of my broken mind. But the sheer, crushing weight of my isolation, the decades of silence, it was too much to bear. The presence in my head was a warmth I had never known. And so, I did the unthinkable. I reached back. My mental voice was a mere whisper, a wisp of smoke against the roaring fire of haze. Who are you?" The shock that reverberated from the presence was a physical blow. It was absolute, stupefying silence. As if the universe itself had gasped, the pressure in my head intensified, coiling, focusing. I could feel his awareness, a brilliant, terrifying spotlight, swiveling to pin me down in the dark of my own skull. "You are not Luna." His spot was a blade of ice. "What is this? A trick? A witch's spell?" I could feel his power gathering, a storm preparing to break. It was going to crush me, to obliterate this strange, unwelcome intrusion. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. "No, please don't. I'm not a witch. I'm nobody." "You are in my mind," his voice boomed, filled with a rage that was both personal and profound. "This is a violation. A desecration of the sacred bond. Who sent you?" "No one sent me. I don't know how this happened. I was just here. I'm always just here, alone." The word alone seemed to hang in the psychic space between us. Quivering with a truth so raw it was painful, the king's fury hesitated. I could feel his confusion now, a turbulent sea mixing with his anger. He was probing, not with aggression, but with a dawning, horrifying curiosity. "Alone?" he echoed, his thoughts softer but no less intense. "That is not possible. The mind link is for mates alone. It is a private channel sealed by the moon goddess herself. It cannot be intercepted. But it was. I didn't say it. The truth was a heavy, living thing between us. He had reached for his destined Luna, and he had found me, Elara the Broken, trapped in his head. How? The single word was laden with a king's demand and a man's utter bewilderment. I don't know. I swear I don't know. I've never had a mind link. I've never had anything. My own pack thinks I'm empty. Please, you have to believe me. I felt him pull back, not fully, but his presence receded from the forefront of my mind, becoming a watchful, simmering weight at the edge of my consciousness. The connection was still there. A taut, invisible thread humming with power and tension. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone now dangerously calm. "Elara. My name is Elara. Elara." He tested the name, and I felt a strange, shivering sensation. As if his acknowledgement had given it a new weight. "Where are you from, Elara? What pack?" "The Silvermane pack. My father is alphaking." Another wave of stunned silence. "Alphaking? The Silvermane pack is a minor." "Orderland pack. They have no notable seers, no mind mages. This makes no sense. A fresh, different kind of fear seized me. My father. If this powerful, unknown alpha thought I was a threat, an assassin, a spy, what would he do to my father, to my pack? We were already so vulnerable. Please, please don't hurt them. They don't know about this. I didn't do this on purpose. It was an accident." "An accident?" His mental voice was dry, skeptical. "You accidentally hijacked the mind link of an alphaking?" Before I could form a reply, a new sensation flooded the connection. It wasn't from him. It was a distant, feminine call, faint and sweet, like a bell ringing from 1,000 miles away. "Kaelus, my king, I felt you. For a moment I felt the bond. Luna, his true mate. His focus shattered from me instantly, leaping towards that distant call with a desperate, hungry hope. "Luna, I am here. Can you hear me? Show me where you are." The connection to her was weak, frayed. I could feel his frustration, his yearning, a deep primal need to reach his other half. He poured his power into the link, trying to solidify it, to see her, to find her. But something was wrong. The more he pushed towards her, the more the connection between us flared, bright and solid and undeniable. It was like trying to shout to someone far away, but your voice only carries to the person standing right beside you. He was using me as a conduit. I was the unexpected, unwanted amplifier for his call to another woman. "I can't. Hold it." Luna's voice was fading, breaking up. "It's like a shadow between us." And then she was gone. The fragile thread to her snapped. A roar of pure, unadulterated fury erupted from King Kaelus. A psychic explosion that sent a searing pain through my head. I cried out, my hands flying to my temples, my physical body swaying on my feet. "You!" His attention slammed back into me, full of venom and devastation. "You are the shadow. You are blocking me from my mate! I'm not doing it on purpose. I don't care." His voice was a lash. "This ends now. I will find you, Elara of the Silvermane pack. I will tear this unnatural connection out by its roots. And you will tell me exactly what you have done to my bond." The threat was absolute. It was a promise of ruin. And then with a final brutal shove of his will, he severed the connection. The silence returned. But it was different. It was no longer a hollow, familiar loneliness. It was an aching, gaping void. The warmth of his presence, even his furious, terrifying presence, was gone. The cold that rushed in to fill the space was 1,000 times worse than before. I was alone again, but now I knew what I was missing, and I knew that the most powerful wolf in the kingdom was coming for me, not as a savior, but as an executioner. I stumbled to my window, looking out at the forest that bordered our modest pack lands. Somewhere out there, a king was hunting me. And the most terrifying part, a treacherous, shameful part of my soul, the part that had tasted connection for the first time, didn't want him to sever the link at all. It wanted him to come back. The silence in my mind was no longer empty. It was waiting. The silence after his presence vanished was the most profound sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just an absence of noise. It was an absence of life. Upsold. For those few terrifying, exhilarating minutes, I had not been Elara the Broken. I had been connected, intertwined, seen. And now I was more broken than before. The hollow inside me had been carved out anew. Larger and more desolate than ever, I didn't move for a long time. The paint on my brush dried, a crusty, forgotten blue. The weak winter sunlight shifted across the floorboards of my small room, but I felt no warmth. I was ice. Ice on the inside, where his fury had frozen me solid. His name was Kaelus, a king, and he believed I was a curse upon his destiny. A soft knock at my door made me jump, my heart lurching painfully. "Elara? Sweetheart." It was my father's voice, laced with the gentle concern that had been my constant companion for 22 years. I couldn't answer. My throat was sealed shut by a sob I refused to release. The door creaked open. Alphaking of the Silvermane pack was a broad, strong man, but his shoulders were permanently stooped from the weight of a daughter without a wolf. His eyes, the same stormy gray as mine. Found me still standing by the window, clutching the windowsill so tightly the wood groaned in protest. "Elara, what is it?" He was across the room in 3 strides, his large, calloused hands coming to rest on my shoulders. His touch was usually a comfort. Today, it felt like a brand. How could I tell him? How could I explain that I had just mind-linked with an alpha king? He would think the madness had finally taken me. Or worse, he would believe me, and the fear in his eyes would break what was left of my heart. "Just a dizzy spell, Father," I whispered, the lie ash in my mouth. I stood up too fast. He turned me to face him. His gaze, searching, probing. He saw too much. He always saw too much. "You're pale as a ghost, and you're trembling." He brushed a strand of my dark hair from my face. "Perhaps you should rest," the physician said. "I'm fine," I insisted, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in porcelain. "Really, I just need some air." The concern in his eyes didn't fade, but he nodded slowly, unwilling to push. He had spent a lifetime walking on eggshells around my fragility. "All right." "But take your cloak. The wind has a bite to it today." I nodded, pulling away from his touch, desperate for space, for solitude to process the earthquake that had just shattered my world. As I moved towards the door, my father spoke again, his voice casual, but with an undercurrent of impotence. "Oh, A royal herald arrived just before noon, a missive from the Onyx Peak throne. I froze, my hand on the doorframe. The blood drained from my face, so quickly the room swam. The Onyx Peak throne? Yes, King Kaelus himself. My father sounded puzzled and a little awed. It's a general summons to all border packs. He's searching for someone, a woman of significance. His scouts and enforcers will be sweeping through the territories, and he demands our full cooperation. My knees buckled. I gripped the doorframe to keep myself upright. He wasn't just coming. He was already here. His shadow was falling over us, and my father had no idea he was inviting the hunter right to his daughter's door. What does this woman look like? My voice was a strangled thread of sound. My father shrugged. The missive didn't say. It only states that she is a threat to the stability of the kingdom and the king's sacred bond. Anyone found harboring her will be considered an enemy of the throne. He looked at me. His brow furrowed. Are you sure you're all right, Elara? You look like you've seen a spirit, a threat, a shadow, an enemy of the throne. The words were daggers, each one finding its mark deep in my chest. King Kaelus had already tried and convicted me in his mind. I'm fine, I repeated, the words automatic, hollow. I just need that air now. I practically fled from the room, from the love and worry in my father's eyes that I was about to betray. I snatched my heavy wool cloak from its peg and rushed out of our house into the biting cold of the afternoon. The Silvermane village was a humble collection of stone and timber homes nestled in a valley, smoke curling from chimneys into the gray sky. The pack members I passed offered me small, pitying smiles or averted their gazes entirely. Elara the Broken, a walking reminder of what could go wrong. Today, their glances felt like accusations. Did they know? Could they sense the king's wrath clinging to me like a shroud? I walked faster, my boots crunching on the frozen path, heading for the one place I had always found a semblance of peace. The whispering woods. The ancient trees, their branches bare and skeletal, closed around me, their silence a welcome respite from the screaming in my head. He was coming. He thought I was a threat. He would tear the connection out. What would that feel like? Would it kill me? Would it leave me a drooling, mindless husk? Or would it simply return me to the silence? A silence I now knew I could never endure again. I stumbled to a stop by the frozen creek, my breath pluming in the air, my body shaking with tremors I could not control. I was so lost in my terror that I didn't sense the shift of the air. I didn't hear the soft, almost silent footfall behind me. Not until a voice, deep and resonant and terrifyingly familiar, spoke aloud. Elara. I whirled around, my heart seizing in my chest. He stood 10 paces away, between two great oaks. He was taller than I had imagined, his presence somehow both more and less than the psychic force that had invaded my mind. He wore dark, travel-worn leathers, a heavy fur-lined cloak thrown back over his shoulders. His hair was the color of crow's wings, and his eyes, goddess, his eyes. They were the color of a winter sky just before a storm, a piercing, furious blue that saw right through me, right into the secret, shameful place in my soul that was thrilled to see him. King Kaelus, he had found me, already. I took a stumbling step back, my heel catching on a root. I would have fallen, but a surge of his power, a ripple in the air, held me upright. It wasn't a gentle act. It was a demonstration of control. You, I breathed, the word barely a whisper. Me, he confirmed, his voice low and dangerously calm. He didn't move, but his gaze was a physical weight pinning me to the spot. Did you truly believe you could hide from me? I wasn't hiding. I told you the truth. I don't know how this happened. Lies. The word crept through the quiet woods. Sharp as a whip, he took a single step forward, and the space between us seemed to shrink, charged with his anger. The mind's link is sacred. It is immutable. It does not make mistakes. He said the last word with utter contempt, as if the very concept was beneath him. It's not a mistake, I cried, desperation giving me a courage I didn't know I possessed. It's a connection. I felt it. You felt it too. You know I'm not lying. His eyes narrowed. I know that your presence is a poison in my mind. I know that you stand between me and my destined Luna. I can feel her, Elara, a faint, fading song on the other side of a wall, and you are that wall. He took another step, and then another. He was close now, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his stormy eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. I was trapped by his power, by his presence, by the terrifying magnetic pull of the bond that should not exist. What are you going to do to me? My voice trembled. His gaze swept over me from my wind-tangled hair to my simple, worn dress and cloak. It was a cold, assessing look, the look of a king evaluating a problem to be solved. I am going to take you with me. My blood ran cold. What? No! My father, my pack, will be told that you have been chosen for a great honor, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument, that the king himself requires your unique talents. They will not question it. They will be proud. A cruel, mocking smile touched his lips. It is a better story than the truth. Is it not? That their broken, wolfless daughter is a criminal who tampered with a king's soul? Tears of helpless rage and fear welled in my eyes. I am not a criminal. Prove it, he challenged, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Come with me willingly. Submit to my examination. Help me find a way to sever this abomination. Do that, and I will show mercy to you and your pack. Defy me. He let the threat hang in the frozen air. More potent than any spoken warning, I was crying openly now, the tears freezing on my cheeks. I had no choice, no weapon, no power, no wolf to defend myself. Only this strange, unwanted connection that tethered me to my own destruction. He reached out, not to touch me, but to gesture towards the path that led out of the woods. We leave now. Say your goodbyes in your heart. You will not be returning to this place. The finality in his voice shattered me. I looked back through the trees, towards the distant lights of the only home I had ever known. I thought of my father's kind, weary face. I could not drag him into this. I could not be the cause of his ruin. With a sob, I choked back. I turned my back on my home and took a step towards the king. As I did, the connection in my mind, the one he had so brutally severed, flickered back to life, not with words, but with a wave of his simmering frustration, and underneath it, a thread of something else, something that felt startlingly like pain. Good. His voice was a cold whisper in my head. Do not make me compel you. The experience is pleasant. I flinched, but I kept walking, falling into step beside him, a prisoner of a king and a bond that was my only salvation and my certain doom. The woods whispered their secrets around us. But the loudest sound was the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. The world outside the whispering woods was a blur of stark, unforgiving landscape. King Kaelus did not slow his pace, his long strides eating up the ground as if the very earth owed him passage. I stumbled to keep up, my shorter legs and softer life a stark contrast to his relentless warrior's gait. The cold, which I had barely noticed in my panic, now seeped through my cloak and dress, settling deep into my bones. He offered no cloak, no word of concern. I was his prisoner, not his guest. We did not speak, not with our voices. The only sound between us was the crunch of frozen leaves underfoot and the ragged pull of my own breath. But the connection in my mind, it was a live wire, humming with a tension so thick it felt like a physical wall. I could feel his impatience, a low, simmering thrum against my consciousness. He was a man used to action, to command, and this delay, this forced escort of a fragile, weeping girl, was an unbearable irritation. After what felt like an eternity, we broke through the tree line, and I stopped dead, my breath catching in a different kind of shock. There, arrayed in a clearing like a vision from a legend, was the king's retinue. It was not a large group, but every member of it radiated a lethal, polished efficiency. A dozen warriors on massive, shaggy horses, their armor gleaming dully in the weak sun, their faces hard and impassive. In the center was a covered sleigh, crafted from dark, polished wood, and pulled by two enormous silver-furred wolves whose eyes held an intelligence that was far from animal. This was not my father's modest pack. This was the power of the Onyx Peak throne, and it was terrifying. One of the warriors, a man with a scar tracing his jawline, dismounted and bowed his head. "Your Majesty, we were beginning to anticipate your return." The unspoken question hung in the air. "Who is this? Where is the woman you were searching for?" Kaelus didn't even look at me. "This is Elara of the Silvermane Pack. She possesses a unique insight. She is to accompany us. See that she is situated in the sleigh." The warrior's eyes flickered to me for a fraction of a second, taking in my tear-streaked face, my simple clothes, my obvious lack of a wolf. His expression did not change, but I felt his judgment, his confusion. He bowed again. "At once, Your Majesty." Kaelus turned and finally looked at me, his stormy eyes devoid of any warmth. "Get in." It was not a request. It was an order that brooked no disobedience. The warrior gestured towards the sleigh. I moved forward on numb legs, my mind reeling. Unique insight. What a careful, clever lie. A lie that would surely unravel the moment anyone looked too closely. I climbed into the sleigh, sinking into plush, dark furs. The interior was warm, smelling of leather and pine smoke. It was the most luxurious thing I had ever touched. And it felt like a cage. The warrior secured the leather flap, closing me in, and within moments, I felt the lurch as the sleigh began to move. Alone in the dim, swaying confines, the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. I was torn from my home, from my father, taken by a king who saw me as a blight on his destiny. What would happen when we reached his fortress? What kind of examination did he have in mind? My imagination conjured terrible images of dark dungeons and cruel instruments designed to pry into a mind. Tears threatened again, hot and sharp, but I choked them back. I would not give him the satisfaction of hearing me weep. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to find a shred of the girl I was just hours ago. A girl who found solace in paint and silence, But that girl was gone. In her place was a terrified young woman, connected to a tyrant by a thread of moonlight she never asked for. The journey was a long, disorienting haze. I lost track of time, the rhythmic sway of the sleigh and the muffled sounds from outside lulling me into a state of exhausted dread. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, cut. The sleigh was slowing to a halt, and the flap was being pulled back. The scarred warrior stood there. "We have arrived at the forward outpost, my lady. The king requests your presence." My lady? The title was so absurd it almost made me laugh. I merely nodded, my body stiff and cold, and allowed him to help me down. The outpost was a formidable stone structure built into the side of a mountain, its towers spearing into the twilight sky. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows. Kaelus was already there, speaking in low, terse tones with another official. He didn't glance in my direction as I was led inside. The interior was Spartan, but strong. All stone and timber. I was taken to a small chamber on an upper floor. It was not a dungeon cell to my surprise. It held a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a single, high window barred with iron. A gilded cage. Indeed, a silent servant brought a tray of food, hearty stew and dark bread, and set it on a small table before leaving without a word. The door closed behind her, and I heard the distinct, final sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place. I was locked in. The stew steamed, its rich aroma filling the small room, but my stomach churned at the thought of food. I walked to the window, standing on my toes to peer through the bars. I could see the dark outline of the whispering woods in the distance. A shadow on the horizon, that was my home. It felt a million miles away. I sank onto the bed, the furs from the sleigh now a mocking memory. This was my reality, a prisoner, a specimen, as the deep silence of the night settled over the outpost. The connection in my mind, which had been a subdued hum, suddenly flared to life. It wasn't with words, not at first. It was a wave of frustration so potent it felt like a physical blow. I gasped, my hands flying to my head. Then, his voice, sharp and laced with a venomous anger. She was there, fainter than a ghost, but she was there. And every time I reach for her, I hit you. This obstruction, it is a torment. I recoiled from the force of his emotion. I hadn't asked for this. I wanted to scream the words at him, but I was too afraid, too overwhelmed. His spots continued, a turbulent, unfiltered stream. What magic is this? What are you? A human could not do this. A wolf without a spirit should not have a mind voice at all. So what? Are you? The last three words were punctuated with a searing intensity, each one a demand for an answer I did not have. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't just sit and listen to his accusations in the sanctity of my own mind. Gathering every ounce of my courage, I pushed back. "I don't know," I shouted the thought into the void between us. "I am just Elara." I have always been just Elara. I didn't cast a spell. I didn't ask for you to find me. You crashed into my head, remember? You called me Luna. The silence from his end was absolute, stunned. I had never shouted at him before. I had only ever pleaded. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less dangerous. "Do not raise your voice to me." "Or what?" I shot back, a reckless, terrified bravery taking hold. "What more can you do to me? You've already taken me from my home, locked me in a room, and condemned me for a crime I didn't commit. You are the king. You're supposed to be just. You're supposed to be wise. but all I see is a bully who can't solve his own problem. The moment the thought left me, I froze, my blood turning to ice. What had I done? I had just insulted the Alpha King, in his own mind. I waited for the explosion, for the psychic roar that would shatter my sanity. It didn't come. Instead, there was a long, heavy pause. I could feel his shock, a ripple of pure, unadulterated astonishment. No one, it seemed, spoke to the Alpha King that way. When his voice finally returned, it was laced with a cold, deadly calm that was far more frightening than his anger. You have spirit, after all. A pity it is misplaced. Get some sleep, Elara. Tomorrow we begin unraveling this, and I promise you, it will not be a pleasant experience for either of us. And then he was gone. The connection didn't sever, but he withdrew, pulling his presence back behind a wall of impenetrable ice, leaving me alone in the cold, dark room with nothing but my terror and the chilling echo of his promise. Tomorrow. The word hung in the silence, a threat and a promise. Tomorrow the examination would begin, and I was utterly, completely defenseless. Sleep was a futile pursuit. It danced at the edges of my exhaustion, a tempting illusion that vanished the moment I closed my eyes. The room was too cold, the silence too loud, and the phantom echo of King Kaelus's promise was a drumbeat of dread in my mind. It will not be a pleasant experience. The words coiled around me, serpentine and cold, squeezing the air from my lungs. The first gray light of dawn was bleeding through the barred window when the bolt on my door slid back with a heavy metallic clank. I sat up, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. The door opened to reveal the scarred warrior from the previous day. His expression was as unreadable as stone. "The king awaits you in the lower hall," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of inflection. My limbs felt heavy, weighted with fear, but I forced myself to stand. I had no choice. I followed him out of the room and down a series of cold, torch-lit stone corridors. The outpost was stirring to life. The sounds of clanking armor and low murmurs echoing around us. Every warrior we passed would stop and bow their heads slightly, but their eyes were full of a sharp, curious scrutiny that made me feel like a strange insect pinned to a board. We entered a large, circular hall with a high vaulted ceiling. A great fire roared in a massive hearth, but it did little to dispel the chill in the room. And there, standing before the flames, with his back to me, was Kaelus. He turned as we entered. In the daylight filtering through high windows, he looked even more imposing, more regal, and more terrifying. His stormy eyes pinned me in place from across the room. "Leave us," he commanded the warrior, who bowed and retreated without a word, closing the heavy doors behind him. We were alone. The connection in my mind, which had been a subdued, icy hum all night, now flared with a focused, relentless intensity. He was not just looking at me. He was probing me. His mental presence a scalpel searching for a seam in my defenses. "We begin now," he said, his voice echoing in the vast. Empty hall. He didn't move from his place by the fire. "You will lower your mental shields." I stared at him bewildered. I don't have any shields. I don't know how. A flicker of impatience crossed his face. Everyone has shields. It is an instinct, like breathing. You are blocking me from my mate. Therefore, you must be consciously or unconsciously maintaining a barrier. Lower it. I'm not, I insisted, my voice rising with desperation. I don't know what you want me to do. This is all just happening to me. His jaw tightened. Then we will do this the hard way. He took a step forward, and then another. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with his power. I could feel it pressing in on me. A tangible force that made the hair on my arms stand on end. It was the same pressure I had felt when he first mind-linked me. But now it was focused, aggressive. What are you doing? I whispered, taking a step back. Forcing the issue, he replied, his gaze unwavering. And then it began. It started as a pressure in my temples, a dull, insistent throb. But it quickly intensified, sharpening into a piercing, needle-like pain. I cried out, my hands flying to my head. Stop! Please, stop! The connection is a pathway. His voice was cold, clinical, as if he were discussing a geographical feature and not the agony he was inflicting upon me. I must map it. I must find its source and its end. You are the obstruction in the middle. I must push through you. You're hurting me. It is a necessary discomfort, he said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. The pain intensified, drilling deeper into my mind. It was like having my skull cracked open, my thoughts and memories laid bare and sifted through by a ruthless, uncaring force. I could feel him, a foreign, violent presence, rifling through the quiet, lonely corners of my consciousness. Tears streamed down my face. I stumbled, my legs giving way, and I collapsed to my knees on the cold stone floor. The pain was blinding. A white-hot fire in my brain. I could no longer form words. All that escaped my lips were ragged, broken sobs. Get out! Get out of my head! I screamed at him with the last shred of my mental strength. For a brief, merciful second, the pressure relented. I gasped, sucking in air, my whole body trembling. I felt a flicker of something from him. Not remorse, but a spark of surprise. Your mental voice, it's stronger when you are under duress. Please, I begged aloud, my voice a raw, broken thing. Please, no more. He ignored me. The pressure returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't a blunt force. It was a searchlight, scanning, seeking. He was looking for something specific. The root of the connection. And then he found it. It wasn't a place or a thing. It was a feeling. A deep, aching, hollow emptiness that had been my constant companion since birth. The void where my wolves should have been. His presence zeroed in on that emptiness, and I felt a jolt of shock so profound it reverberated through both of us. By the moon. His spot was a whisper of pure astonishment. There is nothing there. It's a vacuum. And in that moment, I felt it too. Something I had never been able to perceive before. His power, his kingly, potent energy, was being subtly pulled like a river finding a new channel. Into the void within me, My emptiness wasn't just a lack, it was a vacuum, and his bond to his true Luna was being drawn into it, filtered through me. I wasn't a wall, I was a siphon. The revelation was as terrifying for me as it was for him. He recoiled, yanking his presence back so violently that the connection snapped taut, sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. The pain vanished, leaving behind a throbbing, bruised ache deep within my mind. I remained on my knees, shaking, unable to look at him. Silence descended upon the hall, broken only by the crackling of the fire and my own ragged breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. A cold, clinical anger was gone, replaced by a low, simmering horror. You are not blocking the bond. I looked up, wiping the tears from my face with a trembling hand. He was staring at me, his expression a mask of dawning. Awful understanding. You are absorbing it, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. Your lack, your emptiness, it is pulling on my power, on my connection to Luna. It is not an act of malice. It is a fundamental imbalance. A flaw in the fabric of the magic itself. He took a step back, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of utter frustration and disbelief. This should not be possible. The bond is absolute. It cannot be diverted. I slowly, painfully pushed myself to my feet. My legs felt like water. So, what does that mean? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a king facing a criminal, but a man facing an impossible problem. The fury was still there, but it was now tangled with a bewildered confusion. It means, he said, his voice grim, that I cannot tear this connection out. To do so would be like trying to tear out my own soul. It is intertwined with yours in a way I do not understand. Severing it could shatter us both. The finality of his words settled over me. This wasn't a temporary affliction. This was a permanent condition. I was bound, forever, to a king who despised the very sight of me. Then, what do we do? My voice was small, lost in the vastness of the hall. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze turning inward. I could feel the turmoil in his mind, the frantic, racing thoughts as he tried to process this new, devastating information. We continue to the Onyx Peak, he said finally, his decision made. My court has scholars. Ancient texts, artifacts of power. There may be a record of such an anomaly. There may be a way to correct it. He looked at me, and his eyes were hard again, the brief window of vulnerability slamming shut. Until then, you remain with me. You are a walking, talking vulnerability, Elara, a crack in my armor, and I cannot allow that crack to be exploited by my enemies. He turned and walked towards the doors, his cloak swirling behind him. Prepare to depart. We ride within the hour. He left me standing there in the cold hall, the ghost of his psychic violation still aching in my mind. But the pain was now secondary to a new, chilling understanding. I wasn't just a prisoner or a specimen. I was a flaw, a king's greatest weakness. And in a world of power and predators, that was the most dangerous thing to be. The journey to the Onyx Peak was a descent into a world I had only ever heard of in whispers. The rugged borderlands gave way to deep, ancient forests, and then to soaring, snow-capped mountains that scraped a sky of impossible blue. The air grew thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of ice and stone. With every mile, the weight of the king's presence, both physical and psychic, seemed to grow heavier. I was no longer confined to the sleigh. Kaelus, in his new grim pragmatism, had decided I needed to be within his sight at all times. I was given a gentle, placid mare and made to ride near the front of the collo, just a few paces behind him. It was a position of supposed honor that felt exactly like what it was, the vigilant guarding of a prized. Dangerous secret. We did not speak. He offered no further explanations, no apologies for the agony he had inflicted in the outpost hall. The connection between us was a silent, tense wire. I could feel the constant, low-grade hum of his frustration, a simmering pot that never quite boiled over, but was always on the verge. He was a man of action, trapped in a puzzle with no clear solution, and his impotence was a poison in his veins. I, in turn, huddled deep within my borrowed cloak, a thicker, warmer one provided by a silent servant, and tried to make myself small. I was hyper-aware of the warriors around us. Their discipline was absolute. But I caught the occasional flick of a gaze in my direction, the subtle shift in posture when I moved. They were loyal to their king, and I was an anomaly. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if Kaelus gave the order, any one of them would cut me down without a second thought. It was during the third day of travel, as we began the arduous climb up the winding mountain pass that led to the capital. At the first crack appeared in Kaelus's impenetrable armor. We were navigating a narrow ledge, a sheer drop on one side and a wall of jagged rock on the other. The wind howled, a relentless force that tugged at our cloaks and stung our eyes. My mare, usually so steady, shied nervously at a particularly fierce gust, her hooves skittering on the loose scree. A jolt of pure, undiluted fear, not my own, shot through the mental connection. It was so sharp, so sudden, it stole my breath. I looked ahead. Kaelus had reined his massive stallion to a halt and had half-turned in his saddle, his knuckles white on the reins. His face was a mask of cold control. But his eyes were locked on me, wide with a stark, primal terror that was gone in a blink, replaced by a scowl of fury. "Do not do that again." His voice snarled in my head, laced with a venom that couldn't quite hide the tremor beneath. I was too stunned to respond. His fear, it hadn't been for himself, it had been for me. The realization was so shocking, it left me reeling. He saw me as a flaw, a vulnerability, but the thought of that vulnerability plunging off a cliff had triggered a king's instinct to protect what was his. Before I could process it, a new sensation washed over me through the bond. It was distant, faint, but unmistakable. A melody of light and warmth, a feeling of gentle strength and unwavering devotion. It was her, Luna, his true mate. The feeling was beautiful. It was pure, and it felt like a shard of glass twisting in my heart. Kaelus stiffened in his saddle, his entire being focusing on that distant call. Luna? His mental voice was a desperate, yearning whisper. Can you hear me? The connection wavered, flickering like a candle in the wind. I could feel him pouring all his focus, all his immense power into reaching her. But just like before, the more he reached for her, the brighter and more solid the bond between us became. I was the lens, and he was forced to look through me to see her. The beautiful feeling from Luna shifted, tinged with confusion and a faint, sorrowful doubt. Kaelus, there's a shadow. It hurts. And then she was gone, snuffed out like a star behind a cloud. The roar that tore from Kaelus's throat was not psychic this time. It was a raw, animal sound of anguish and rage that echoed off the mountain faces. He slammed a fist against his thigh, the leather of his glove groaning in protest. The warriors behind us froze, their hands going to their weapons. Their eyes scanning the cliffs for a threat they could not see. The only threat was me. He wheeled his stallion around, his face a thundercloud. He urged the beast forward until he was right beside me, so close our knees almost touched. The heat of his anger was a physical force. You see? He hissed, his voice low and dangerous for my ears only. You see what you do? You are not just a passive flaw, Elara. You are an active poison. You taint the bond. You cause her pain. Tears welled in my eyes. But this time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of a sudden, fierce, and righteous anger. I am not doing it on purpose. Bayo want this. I don't want your bond or your pain or your constant presence in my head. You think I enjoy being this conduit for a love that isn't mine? It is torture for me too. He stared at me, his chest heaving. My outburst had shocked him into silence. The raw honesty of my pain seemed to cut through the wall of his own fury. Every time you reach for her, I feel it, I continued, my voice trembling but clear. I feel your hope, your love, your desperation. And then I feel it shatter, and I feel her slip away, and I feel your rage afterward. Directed at me, do you have any idea what that is like? To be an unwilling witness to a love story that your very existence is ruining? For a long moment, the only sound was the howling wind. The storm in his eyes had not abated. But it had changed. The lightning of pure rage was gone, replaced by the dark, churning clouds of a complex, unwelcome understanding. He looked away from me, his gaze sweeping over the vast, unforgiving landscape below. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might break. We keep moving, he said, his voice flat and exhausted. He nudged his stallion forward, taking his place back at the head of the column. The rest of the day's ride passed in a silence that was different from before. It was not just tense. It was heavy with shared, miserable understanding. The connection hummed with his turmoil, a turbulent mix of guilt, frustration, and a reluctant, grudging acknowledgement of my own suffering. He had seen me as a thing, a problem to be solved, but my words had forced him for a fleeting second to see me as a person who was just as much a victim of this cosmic mistake as he was. It was a small shift, a tiny, almost insignificant crack in the fortress of his resentment. But as we rode ever higher towards his fortress of stone and power, I clung to that crack. It was the first flicker of something that wasn't pure hatred. And in my gilded cage, even the smallest flicker of light felt like a hope worth holding onto. The onyx peak was not a castle. It was a mountain carved into a throne. It speared into the heavens, a brutal, magnificent slash of black rock against the pale sky. As our party ascended the final winding pass, the fortress revealed itself. Towers that grew from the mountain itself, sheer walls that seemed to defy gravity, and bridges of stone arching over dizzying chasms. It was a place of immense, unyielding power, and it made my humble packlands feel like a forgotten dream. A horn sounded from high above, a deep, mournful note that was picked up and echoed by others. A cascade of sound announcing the king's return. The massive iron-reinforced gates, carved with the likeness of a howling wolf, began to swing inward with a groan that spoke of immense weight and age. We passed under the gate's shadow, and the world changed. The howling wind was cut off, replaced by the echoing clatter of hooves on polished stone. We were in a vast courtyard, teeming with life. Warriors in gleaming armor stood at attention. Servants bowed low, their faces a mixture of reverence and curiosity. And everywhere, I felt the press of powerful wolves, their spirits bright and strong in a way that was almost overwhelming after a lifetime of silence. I felt 1,000 eyes upon me, the unknown woman riding in the shadow of the king. I kept my gaze fixed on Kaelus's broad back, my heart a frantic bird beating against the bars of my ribs. He dismounted with a fluid, powerful grace, handing his reins to a waiting stable hand without a glance. He turned, his eyes finding me immediately, a silent command to follow. I slid from my mare, my legs stiff and trembling, and stumbled to keep up with his long strides as he moved towards the great central keep. The interior of the fortress was a labyrinth of grandeur and shadow. Great halls with vaulted ceilings gave way to narrow, torchlit corridors. The air was cold and smelled of stone, smoke, and old magic. Tapestries depicting legendary battles and ancient kings lined the walls, their threads seeming to shift and move in the flickering light. We did not stop. We climbed endless staircases, passed through halls where courtiers fell silent and bowed as we passed, their whispers rising in our wake like a tide. I heard the words, "Silvermane, who is she?" "No wolf." They were like stones thrown at my back. Finally, he stopped before a pair of ornate wooden doors. He pushed them open without ceremony and gestured for me to enter. The room beyond was breathtaking. It was a spacious solar, with a large arched window that offered a staggering view of the surrounding mountain peaks. Their tips glowing in the light of the setting sun. A fire crackled in a hearth of dark marble. The furnishings were rich but elegant. A large bed draped in silks, a carved writing desk, plush chairs, and shelves lined with books. It was far more luxurious than my room at home, even more so than the outpost. But the sight of the heavy bar on the inside of the door, and the fact that we were likely 100 feet up, confirmed its true nature. "These are your chambers," Kaelus said, his voice echoing in the spacious room. "You will remain here unless I summon you. A servant will attend to your needs. Do not attempt to leave." I turned to face him, wrapping my arms around myself. So I'm to be a prisoner in a prettier cage. His expression was unreadable. You are a guest whose presence requires discretion. My court is a nest of vipers. If they were to learn what you are, to crack in my armor, they would not hesitate to exploit it, to use you against me. Your safety, and by extension, the stability of this kingdom, depends on your anonymity. My safety? I couldn't keep the bitter laugh from my voice. Or the safety of your secret? A muscle in his jaw twitched. They are one and the same. Rest, bathe. A meal will be brought to you. I will send for you when I have consulted my scholars. He turned to leave, but I found a sliver of courage. Fueled by exhaustion and the lingering hurt from the mountain pass. And what if they find no answers in your ancient texts? What then, Your Majesty? Am I to be your permanent, unwanted guest? A ghost in your halls forever? He paused at the door, his back to me. The connection between us flared with a complex, turbulent emotion I couldn't name. Frustration, resignation, and something else, something weary and deep. Then we learned to live with the ghost, he said quietly. And without another word, he left, closing the door behind him. I heard the distinct final sound of the bolt sliding home on the outside. I was alone, again. I stood there for a long time, simply staring at the closed door. The grandeur of the room felt like a mockery. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cold glass, looking out at a world of majestic, terrifying beauty. This was his kingdom. This was his power. And I was a flaw hidden at its heart. A soft knock came at the door before it opened. A young woman, perhaps a few years older than me, entered. She had kind, intelligent eyes and wore a simple, neat dress. She bowed her head. My lady, I am Lyra. I am to be your attendant. She glanced at the barred door, then back at me, her expression carefully neutral. His Majesty has instructed that you are to have everything you require. May I draw you a bath? The journey must have been difficult. Her kindness, the first genuine, unforced kindness I had encountered since leaving home, was almost my undoing. Tears pricked at my eyes. But I blinked them back. I would not break down in front of a stranger. A bath would be wonderful. Thank you, Lyra. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile and busied herself in the adjoining bathing chamber. As the sound of running water filled the room, I wandered to the bookshelf. The titles were in languages I didn't recognize, histories of wars and lineages of kings. My fingers trailed over the spines, feeling the cool, worn leather, and then I felt it, a subtle shift in the connection. Kaelus was no longer a distant, brooding presence. He was close, very close. And the emotions coming from him were a storm of conflict and duty. I moved without thinking, drawn to the door. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, straining to hear. I couldn't make out words, but I heard his voice, low and resonant, speaking to someone just outside. Another voice, older, more reedy, answered him. Are you sure, Your Majesty? The risk is immense. To have her here in the very heart of your power. The risk is greater if she is anywhere else. Kaelus's voice was firm. But I could feel the undercurrent of strain. She must be studied, Alaric. I felt it, her nature. It is a void, an emptiness that should not exist. I need you and the other scholars to find me a precedent. A cure, a void, the old man Alaric breathed, his voice filled with a scholar's fascination and fear. Such a thing is not recorded. It is theoretically impossible. The soul and the wolf are one. That cannot be a soul without— And yet she exists, Kaelus interrupted, his tone final. Find me an answer. There was a pause. And Lady Luna, the moon festival is in a fortnight. The entire kingdom will expect an announcement, a confirmation of the bond. A wave of cold, sharp pain shot through the connection from Kaelus, so potent it made me gasp softly. I clapped a hand over my mouth. The Lady Luna will be found, Kaelus said, his voice like grinding stone. See to your task. Alaric. And speak of this to no one. I heard footsteps retreating. Then a long, heavy silence from just outside my door. I could feel him there, on the other side of the wood. His presence was a tangible weight. I held my breath, terrified he knew I was listening. After what felt like an eternity, I felt him move away, his presence receding down the corridor. I slumped against the door, my legs giving way. The moon festival, an announcement. The entire kingdom was waiting for him to present his true mate, his Luna. And he couldn't, because of me. Lyra emerged from the bathing chamber. Your bath is ready. My lady. I looked up at her, my face pale. The warm, steamy air from the bath felt like a lie. I was clean, I was safe, I was in a beautiful room. But I had never been in more danger. I was a secret that could topple a king. Hidden away in a gilded cage at the top of the world. And the clock was ticking. The following days settled into a strange, suffocating rhythm. I was a ghost in the onyx peak, a whispered secret in its stone veins. My world shrank to the confines of my solar, the attached bathing chamber, and the small, private balcony that overlooked a dizzying drop into a mist-shrouded chasm. Lyra was my only tether to the outside. A quiet, efficient presence who brought meals, tended to the fire, and provided me with simple materials for drawing and sewing. She was polite, but carefully distant, her loyalty to the king an invisible wall between us. I tried to occupy my hands, to still my mind. I sketched the view from my window, the relentless, majestic mountains that were so different from the gentle, rolling woods of home. But my charcoal always strayed, sketching instead the proud, angry line of a jaw, the stormy intensity of eyes that saw me as a flaw. I would crumple the parchment, my cheeks burning with a shame I didn't understand. The connection was a constant. Humming awareness. Kaelus was a storm cloud perpetually on my horizon. I could feel the tides of his day, the sharp focus of his council meetings, the simmering impatience during reports from his scouts searching for Luna. The deep, grinding frustration that settled over him each night. He never spoke to me directly through the bond, but his silence was a language of its own, heavy with unspoken accusations. It was during the deep, quiet hours of the third night that the pattern broke. A jolt of searing, white-hot pain shot through the bond, so violent and sudden it ripped a pry from my throat. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering. My skin slick with a cold sweat. It wasn't my pain, it was his. It was followed by a wave of disorientation, a dizzying swirl of images and sensations that weren't my own. The coppery taste of blood. The cold bite of stone against his back. The ragged, gasping breaths of another. The crushing weight of failure. A vision. A premonition. He was in danger, mortal danger, without thought, without reason. I acted. I threw the mental equivalent of a scream down the connection, putting all my fear, all my frantic warning into a single, raw thought. Kaelus. The feedback was instantaneous. The pain in the bond vanished, replaced by a shockwave of pure, stunned awareness. His consciousness, which had been scattered and distant, snapped to mine with the force of a physical blow. "Elara!" His mental voice was ragged, laced with the lingering echo of whatever vision had gripped him. How did you? You're in pain," I sent back, my own thoughts trembling. "What happened? Are you hurt?" There was a long, heavy pause. I could feel his rapid heartbeat, the adrenaline coursing through him, the slow, deliberate effort to master his own shock. A vision, an ambush, on the northern patrol. His thoughts were sharp. Clinical now, the king pushing aside the disoriented man. "You felt it? You saw it?" "I felt your pain. I felt blood and stone." Another silence, this one thick with a dawning, terrifying realization. The bond, it is not one way. It is not just me being siphoned. You are a conduit for more than just my connection to Luna. The implications settled over us both, cold and heavy. I could feel his emotions. I could feel his physical pain. I had just intercepted a king's vision. "Where?" I asked, the question a mere whisper in my mind. "Where is the ambush?" "The Serpent's Pass, 2 days' ride from here." His thoughts were already racing. Plans forming, commands being issued. I could feel the fortress stirring to life around him, the silent, efficient machinery of his power responding to his unspoken will. And then, a new sensation. A flicker of something from him that wasn't anger or frustration. It was a spark of gratitude. It was so faint, so quickly buried under a surge of purposeful action, that I might have imagined it, but I felt it. "Return to sleep, Elara." His voice was curt, but the sharp edge was gone. "This is not your concern." The connection didn't sever, but he walled himself off, his mind becoming a fortress of strategy and command. I was left alone in the dark, my body still thrumming with the aftershocks of his pain and my own fear. He had been in danger, and I had known. I had felt it. The bond was deeper, more intertwined than either of us had imagined. I was not just a flaw or a secret. I was now, inexplicably, his early warning system. Sleep was impossible. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and moved to the balcony, shivering in the cold night air. The mountains were silent sentinels under a blanket of stars. Somewhere out there, a king was moving his pieces on a board, acting on a vision he would have had too late if not for me. The next 2 days were an agony of suspense. The connection was a live wire, humming with his focused intensity. I felt the moment his warriors engaged the enemy, a brief, sharp spike of battle focus and controlled violence. I felt the moment the threat was neutralized, a wave of grim satisfaction, and beneath it, a profound relief. That evening, as Lyra brought my dinner, her usual neutral mask was slightly cracked. "There was a victory in the north, my lady," she said, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. "The king's patrol was ambushed by rogues." But our forces were prepared. They say the king had a vision of the attack. He saved them all. I merely nodded, my throat tight. He had saved them. But I had saved him. Later, as I picked at my food. The connection stirred, not with words, but with a simple, direct impulse, a clear mental image of the door to my chambers. He was coming. My heart leapt into my throat. I set down my fork, my hands suddenly clammy. A few minutes later, I heard the bolt slide back. The door opened, and Kaelus stood there. He still wore his travel clothes, dusted with the grime of the road. A faint cut marred his cheekbone, and he moved with a slight stiffness that spoke of recent hard exertion. He smelled of cold air, horse, and blood. He didn't enter fully, just stood on the threshold, his stormy eyes fixed on me. The connection was wide open, and the turbulent mix of his emotions was overwhelming. Lingering adrenaline, kingly satisfaction, and a deep, bewildered confusion that was directed squarely at me. We stared each other in silence for a long moment. 12 warriors are returning to their families tonight because of that vision, he said finally, his voice low and rough with fatigue. The ambush was a trap within a trap. Without the warning, they would have been slaughtered. I would have been compromised. I said nothing. I just watched him. My heart pounding. His gaze was intense, searching, as if he were seeing me for the very first time. The scholars have found nothing. No record of a void. No precedent for a bond like this. He took a single step into the room. Should not be able to feel my pain. You should not be able to intercept a seer's vision. It defies every law of our magic. I know, I whispered. He ran a hand over his face, the gesture weary. The moon festival is in 10 days. The unspoken words hung between us. And I am no closer to my true mate because of you. But the accusation that usually laced those words was absent. It was replaced by a stark, simple statement of fact, a problem that now had new, even more complicated dimensions. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, the king vanished, and I saw only the man, tired, confused, and burdened by a mystery he could not solve. "Thank you," he said, the words quiet, grudging, but undeniable. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him. The bolt slid home once more, but as I stood there in the center of my beautiful prison, the echo of his gratitude lingered in the air, and in my mind, it felt like a key had turned in a lock I didn't know existed. The king's gratitude did not unlock my door, but it changed the air within my gilded cage. The silence that stretched between us through the bond was no longer solely hostile. It was now layered with a tense, mutual curiosity, an unspoken acknowledgement that the rules of our predicament had shifted. Lyra arrived the next morning with my breakfast, her eyes alight with a new, respectful curiosity. The entire fortress speaks of the king's foresight in the north. "My lady," she said as she set the tray down. "They say he was like a man possessed, moving troops with a certainty that defied logic." She glanced at me, a question in her gaze that she was too well trained to voice. I merely offered a small smile, my heart twisting. They praised his foresight, never knowing the flaw they whispered about had been its source. Later that day, a new addition appeared in my room, a large ... Flat package wrapped in plain cloth lay on the writing desk. Frowning, I approached and carefully unfolded it. Inside was a breathtaking set of high-quality watercolor paints, brushes of various sizes made from fine sable, and a stack of heavy textured paper. There was no note, none was needed. The connection hummed, and for a fleeting second I felt a flicker of something from Kaelus. Not an emotion, but an image, a memory. He had seen, through our connected minds, the half-finished painting of the lonely moon in my room back home. He had seen the dried, crusty paint on my abandoned brush. My breath caught. This was not an apology. It was an observation, an acknowledgement of a piece of who I was before he shattered my world. It was the most disarming thing he could have done. Tentatively, I dipped a brush in water, selected a deep blue, and touched it to the paper. The color bloomed, rich and vibrant. It was a small piece of my soul given back to me. I painted the view from my balcony, but this time I didn't crumple it up. This time, I let the mountain stand, proud and unyielding, under a sky I filled with the swirling, confused colors of my own heart. The following evening, the connection stirred with a different kind of impulse. Not a summons, but an invitation. A clear mental picture of a specific, secluded section of the royal gardens, followed by a sensation of waiting. My pulse quickened. This was a risk, to be seen with him, but the thought of leaving my rooms, of breathing air that wasn't filtered through stone, was a temptation I couldn't resist. I found a warm cloak and waited until the corridors were quiet. To my astonishment, when I tentatively pushed my door, it swung open without resistance. The bolt was drawn back. He had unlocked my cage. My heart in my throat, I moved like a shadow through the torch-lit hallways, following the pull of the bond as much as my memory of the fortress's layout. I found a small arched door that led outside and slipped through it. The royal gardens were a marvel of engineered beauty, carved into terraces on the mountainside. In the moonlight, the frozen flower beds and sculpted hedges glittered with a coat of frost. And there, standing by a barren fountain, his broad back to me, was Kaelus. He turned as I approached. He was not wearing his royal regalia, just simple, dark trousers and a tunic. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior. Weary from a long campaign, we stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the sigh of the wind through the peaks. "Your painting," he said finally, his voice low. "You have talent." The simple compliment, so unexpected, left me speechless. I just nodded, wrapping my cloak tighter around me. "The scholars are frustrated," he continued, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Alaric mere tore his beard out today. "He says your existence is an offense to 1,000 years of magical theory." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I believe he is starting to like you for it." I couldn't help it. A small, startled laugh escaped me. It sounded strange and foreign to my own ears. The sound made him look at me, truly look at me, and the connection flared with his surprise. He had never heard me laugh. "The festival," I said, the smile fading from my face as the weight of reality returned. "What will you do?" His own expression sobered. "I will delay. I will say the moon goddess has revealed a period of trial, a test of my worthiness before she fully reveals my Luna." He let out a short, bitter breath. "It is a flimsy excuse, but it's all I have. My council is growing restless. They smell uncertainty. It makes them nervous, and nervous wolves are dangerous wolves." I could feel the truth of his words. The immense political pressure he was under. The stability of his kingdom was balancing on the secret of my existence. "Does it hurt?" he asked abruptly, his eyes searching mine in the moonlight. "The void inside you? Does it cause you pain? The question was so direct, so personal, it stole my breath. No one had ever asked me that. They only saw the absence of the wolf, not the feeling of the absence itself. Not a physical pain, I said softly, my gaze dropping to the frozen ground. It's a loneliness, a constant, hollow ache, like I am forever listening for a song that everyone else can hear, but I am deaf to it. I dared to look up at him. Until this, it was just silence. Now it's a different kind of noise. He was silent for a long time, absorbing my words. I could feel him turning them over in his mind, examining this new piece of the puzzle that was me. I have spent my life surrounded by noise, he said quietly, the noise of my wolf. The noise of my tack, the noise of command and duty and expectation. He met my eyes, and the storm in his was momentarily still. I have never known silence. I think I might be afraid of it. In that moment, the king was gone. The furious, powerful man who had torn me from my home was nowhere to be seen. In his place was just Kaelus, a man as bound by his nature as I was by my lack of it. We stood there for a long while, not speaking, the bond between us humming with a strange, quiet understanding. It was not friendship. It was not affection. It was a truce, forged in the shared soil of our mutual confinement. Finally, he stirred. You should go back inside. It's cold. I nodded, turning to leave. Elara. I stopped and looked back. The door will be unbolted each night at this hour, he said, his voice once more that of the king, but softer at the edges. The gardens are secure. You may walk here if you wish. No one else comes here after dark. It was a gift, a fragment of freedom, a return to my cage, but with a key I had not possessed before. Thank you, I whispered. As I walked back to my rooms, the hollow ache inside me didn't feel quite as vast. It was still there. It would always be there. But for the first time, it didn't feel quite so alone. The unbolted door became a secret lifeline. Each night, under the cover of darkness, I would escape my beautiful prison and walk the frost-kissed paths of the secluded garden. It was my small rebellion, my taste of freedom, and with each passing evening, the crushing weight of the fortress walls seemed to lessen just a little. Kaelus was often there, a silent, brooding shadow by the barren fountain. We rarely spoke. Words felt clumsy and unnecessary when the connection between us hummed with such vivid, unspoken life. I could feel the slow, grinding gears of his thoughts as he wrestled with the problems of his kingdom. I felt the sharp sting of his impatience with the scholars who had no answers, and the ever-present dull ache of his yearning for the mate he could not properly reach. One such night, a week after our first Arden meeting, the air was particularly sharp and clear. The moon was a brilliant, perfect sliver, a cruel reminder of the festival fast approaching. I was standing at the garden's edge, looking out at the sea of mountains, when I felt a new sensation from Kaelus. It wasn't a thought or an emotion. It was a presence, faint, wild, and pulsing with a raw, ancient power that was entirely separate from his own. It was the spirit of his wolf. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest. I had spent my entire life surrounded by wolves, but I had never, ever felt one. Not like this. This was not an external force. It was an integral part of him, a roaring fire contained within the fortress of his body. and through our bond, I could feel its heat. "What is it?" His mental voice was immediate, concerned. He had felt my shock. Your wolf," I sent back, my mind reeling. "I can feel him." A wave of profound astonishment washed from him. So potent, it merely buckled my knees. "That is not possible. You are—" He didn't finish the thought. "Empty." The word hung between us, but it had lost its sting, replaced by sheer wonder. "He feels strong," I whispered into my mind. "Awestruck. And loyal. And sad?" Kaelus was silent for a long moment. When he finally responded, his mental voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "He is. He grieves for the mate he consents, but cannot run with. He feels the same failure that I do." Tentatively, almost fearfully, I reached out along the bond, not towards Kaelus the king, but towards the wild, magnificent creature that was his other half. I had no wolf to offer in greeting, only the vast, silent emptiness that was my soul. And then, the most impossible thing of all happened. The wolf noticed me. It wasn't a hostile notice. It was a curious, gentle sniffing at the edges of my consciousness. I felt a warm, inquisitive nudge, like a great beast lowering its head to examine a strange, fragile bird. There was no judgment in its presence, only a simple, primal curiosity. A single, clear impulse came from it. Not in words, but in pure feeling, a feeling of recognition. Tears welled in my eyes, freezing on my lashes. In all my life, no wolf had ever acknowledged me. They would look through me, their gazes sliding away from a hollow girl. But this one, the wolf of an alpha king, was looking at me. He saw the void, and he did not turn away in disgust or pity. He was simply curious. From Kaelus, I felt a second, even greater wave of shock, followed by a deep, resonating turmoil. He has never reached out to anyone but me, not even to my most trusted warriors. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice trembling in my mind. "I do not know," he replied. And I could feel the truth of it. He was as lost as I was. But it seems our bond is not the only impossible thing happening here. We stood there for a long time, the three of us, connected in the moonlit garden. A king, the broken girl, and the royal wolf who had chosen to acknowledge the void. It was a silent, sacred communion that defied every law of their world and mine. When I finally returned to my rooms, my soul felt different. The hollow ache was still there. It would always be there. But it was no longer just an emptiness. It was a space that had, for one fleeting moment, been touched by something wild and wonderful. The wolf had not filled the silence, but he had sung a single, quiet note into it, and the echo was the most beautiful sound I had ever known. The next day, Lyra brought my noon meal, her expression unusually troubled. "Is something wrong, Lyra?" I asked. She hesitated, wringing her hands slightly. "It's just court gossip, my lady. Nothing for you to trouble yourself with." "Please," I said gently. "I hear little else in this room." She sighed. "There is talk, my lady, about the king and the festival. Some of the older nobles, they are beginning to whisper that the king's bond must be weak, that perhaps the moon goddess is punishing him for some unknown slight." They whisper that a king without a strong mate is a vulnerable king. My blood ran cold. This was the danger Kaelus had spoken of. The vipers in his court were starting to stir. And Lyra lowered her voice further. There are whispers about you. My lady, they cannot understand why a woman from a minor border pack is housed in the royal wing. They question your significance. The walls of my gilded cage, which had felt so much lighter these past few days, suddenly seemed to close in again. My secret walks, the king's unspoken truce, the wolf's recognition. It was all a fragile bubble, and the sharp needles of court intrigue were poised to pop it. The connection in my mind stirred. Kaelus had felt my spike of fear. A wave of grim reassurance flowed from him, solid and steadying. Do not fear their whispers. His voice was a low growl in my mind. I control this court. They will not touch you. But as Lyra left and I was alone once more, his words provided little comfort. He controlled the court, yes, but he could not control the truth forever. The festival was coming, and with it, a day of reckoning for a king. A lost Luna and the broken girl who stood between them. The wolf had recognized me. But the court was another beast entirely, and it was beginning to sniff at the king's hidden flaw. The onyx peak began to swell like a tide. From my balcony, I watched the procession of nobles and dignitaries arrive, their carriages and riders, like colorful ants, winding their way up the treacherous mountain pass. Banners of every hue fluttered in the thin, crisp air. Cold air, each representing a pack pledging fealty to the throne. The fortress, usually a place of stern, muted power, was now draped in silks and garlands of winter ivy. Laughter and music echoed up from the lower courtyards. A stark contrast to the tense silence of the royal wing. The moon festival had arrived. It was a celebration of the moon goddess, of Pack, and of the sacred bonds that tied them all together. And at its heart was to be the celebration of the king's bond with his chosen Luna. A celebration that could not happen. The connection with Kaelus was a tightly wound coil of tension. I felt the relentless pressure of his duties, the endless audiences, the strategic greetings, the need to project an image of unshakable strength. And beneath it all, a constant simmering dread. The official story that the goddess was testing him was holding, but barely. I could feel the skeptical thoughts of his courtiers pressing in on him like a physical weight. On the eve of the main ceremony, Lyra brought not my usual simple meal, but a gown. It was a deep midnight blue, the color of the sky just after the sun has fled. It was simply cut, but the fabric was rich and heavy, embroidered with tiny silver threads that caught the light like scattered stardust. It was beautiful, elegant, and utterly terrifying. The king requests your presence at the grand ball tonight, my lady, Lyra said. Her voice carefully neutral. My heart plummeted. What? No, Lyra, he can't. Everyone will be there. They'll all be looking. The king believes it is safer this way, she interrupted gently. To hide you now would raise more questions than to present you. You will be introduced as a honored guest from a loyal border pack here to witness the festival. It is a common practice. It will explain your presence in the fortress. She held out the gown. You are to wear this. And this. She offered me a small silver mask shaped like a crescent moon. It would cover the upper half of my face. A mask. Of course. The entire court would be masked for them all. It was tradition. He wasn't just giving me an identity. He was giving me a hiding place. I was to be a ghost at the feast, a secret moving openly among them all. Panic clawed at my throat. I wanted to refuse, to barricade the door. But I could feel Kaelus's will through the bond, firm and unyielding. This was not a request, it was a strategic decision. I was a piece on his board, and he was moving me into play. That evening, Lyra helped me into the gown. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me. The fabric whispered as I moved, the silver threads glittering. When she placed the moon-shaped mask on my face, I stared at my reflection in the polished silver mirror. I looked like a stranger, a noblewoman, someone who belonged in a king's court. The illusion was both empowering and deeply unsettling. The bolt slid back on my door. It was time. I walked through the bustling corridors, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The sounds of the ball grew louder, a soaring quartet, the murmur of 100 conversations, the clink of fine crystal. I followed the pull of the bond, a beacon in the crowded. Opulent chaos. The doors to the grand hall were thrown open, revealing a scene of breathtaking splendor. The vast hall was lit by 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off jewels, silks, and polished armor. Masked figures swirled in a graceful dance, their laughter ringing to the vaulted ceiling. It was a world of power and beauty, a world I had only ever observed from the outside. And there, at the far end of the hall, on a raised dais sat King Kaelus. He wore a mask of polished black obsidian, shaped like a wolf's head. It obscured his features, but it could not hide the sheer commanding power of his presence. He was dressed in robes of deep crimson and black, the onyx peak crest emblazoned on his chest. He was every inch the alphaking, a figure of legend made flesh. His gaze found me the moment I entered. Through the bond, I felt a jolt, a spike of something that was not anger or frustration, but pure, unadulterated shock. He was seeing me not as the broken girl from the woods, but as the woman in the midnight gown, her face hidden behind the moon, a mysterious figure stepping into his world. A shock was followed by a slow, warm pulse of appreciation. The feeling was so unexpected, so foreign, it made my head spin. I stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, uncertain. Then, his mental voice, clear and firm amidst the psychic noise of the crowded hall. "Come to the dais." It was a command, but it felt like a lifeline. I moved forward, my legs trembling. The crowd seemed to part before me. A sea of masked faces turning to watch my progress. I heard the whisper start, sibilant and curious. "Who is she?" "The silver mask. From the borderlands, I hear." I kept my eyes fixed on Kaelus. Using his presence as an anchor, I reached the steps of the dais and dipped into a low curtsy, my head bowed. "Rise, Lady Elara of the Silvermane Pack." His voice boomed through the hall, warm and regal. We are pleased you could join us to celebrate the blessings of the moon goddess." I rose, my eyes meeting his through the slits of our masks. The connection between us was a live wire, humming with the intensity of the moment. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room upon us. "The honor is mine, Your Majesty," I said, my voice thankfully steady. He extended his hand. It was not a kingly gesture, but a personal one, an invitation to dance. A collective subtle gasp rippled through the court. The king opening the ball with a border pack noblewoman? It was unprecedented. My breath hitched. This was not part of the plan. This was something else. I had no choice. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong, and a jolt, like a spark of lightning, shot up my arm. He led me down to the dance floor, and the musicians, after a stunned moment, began to play a slow, stately waltz. He was an expert dancer, leading me with a confident grace that made my own clumsy steps feel somehow fluid. We moved together, a swirl of midnight blue and crimson black, the wolf and the moon. "You are causing a spectacle," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I am controlling the narrative," he murmured back, his voice low, from my ears only. His hand was firm on my back. "Let them look. Let them see a king showing favor to a loyal subject. It gives you a reason to be here. It quiets the whispers about why I keep you hidden." But as he spun me across the floor, I could feel it wasn't just about strategy. The appreciation I had felt from him earlier was still there. A warm, steady glow beneath the surface of his kingly composure. He was looking at me, truly looking, and for the first time, he wasn't seeing a flaw or a problem. He was seeing a woman in a moon mask, dancing in his arms. The music swelled. The world outside of us, the staring courtiers, the political games, the lost Luna, faded into a distant hum. There was only the music, the movement, and the electric. Terrifying, thrilling connection thrumming between us. It was a mask, a pretense, a beautiful, dangerous lie. And for one perfect, suspended moment, dancing in the arms of the king, I forgot that it wasn't real. The music ended. The spell broke. Polite applause rippled through the hall, but it was followed by a silence thick with unspoken questions. Kaelus released me, his hand leaving my back, the warmth of his touch replaced by a sudden, chilling void. He gave a slight, formal nod. "Thank you for the dance, Lady Elara." His voice was once more that of the distant king. The mask of the ruler was back in place, harder and more impenetrable than the one of obsidian he wore. The connection between us, which had been a vibrant, flowing river during the dance, now felt like a frozen stream, choked with the ice of duty and reality. He turned away from me, moving to greet a cluster of important-looking nobles, and I was left standing alone in the center of the floor. The stares of the courtiers were no longer just curious. They were sharp, analytical, dissecting the king's unexpected attention. I was a puzzle they were now determined to solve. I retreated to the periphery of the hall, finding a small, shadowed alcove partially hidden by a heavy velvet drape. My heart was still pounding from the dance, from the shocking proximity, from the terrifying, fleeting feeling of belonging. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, trying to calm my racing pulse. From my hiding place, I watched him, Kaelus moved through his court with effortless authority, a word here, a nod there. But through the bond, I could feel the strain. The effort it took to maintain the facade was immense. Every laugh that didn't reach his eyes, every gracious word spoken to a noble whose loyalty was questionable, was a drop of water on a stone, slowly wearing him down. And then I felt it, a new, sharp spike of tension from him. Different from the general strain of the evening, this was specific, focused. My gaze followed his. Across the hall, a woman had entered. She was tall and graceful, her gown a cascade of shimmering white silk. Like freshly fallen snow. Her mask was a delicate thing of silver and pearls, fashioned to look like a constellation. She moved with an innate poise that turned heads, a quiet confidence that demanded attention. Lady Seraphine of the Frostfang Pack. I didn't need to be told her name. The whispers around me supplied it. One of the most powerful and ambitious nobles in the kingdom. And the whispers also said, a woman who had long hoped to be the one standing by the king's side. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Through the bond, I felt Kaelus's irritation, a flicker of wariness. He did not trust her. She glided towards him, a serene smile on her lips, visible below her mask. Your Majesty, she said, her voice a melodious chime that carried through the noise. The ball is a magnificent success, a true testament to your strength. She paused, her head tilting. Though it feels incomplete. The court longs to see its Luna. We all pray the goddess's test will soon be over. Her words were perfectly polite, dripping with feigned concern, but the intent behind them was a needle. Expertly aimed at the king's greatest vulnerability. Kaelus's response was a low rumble, too quiet for me to hear, but I felt the controlled ice in his tone through our connection. Then Seraphine's gaze, sharp and calculating, drifted from the king. It swept across the crowd, and for a heart-stopping second, it landed on me, huddled in my alcove. Her eyes, a piercing winter blue behind her mask, seemed to see right through my silver disguise. They lingered on me for a moment too long, filled with a cold, intelligent curiosity that felt more threatening than any open hostility. She knew. She might not know what I was, but she knew I was significant. The king's dance with the unknown border girl had not escaped her notice. I was a variable in her political calculations, and she did not like variables she could not control. I shrank back deeper into the shadows. My breath catching. The beautiful illusion of the dance shattered completely. I was not a noble guest. I was a pawn, and the other players on the board were now aware of me. The rest of the ball passed in a blur of anxiety. I remained in my alcove, a ghost once more, watching the intricate dance of power and politics I had been thrust into. The music, the laughter, the glittering masks, it all felt sinister now. A beautiful veneer over a pit of snakes. Finally, when I could bear it no longer, I slipped away, fleeing the opulent hall for the silent, cold corridors of the royal wing. I barely made it to my room before my legs gave way. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, the frantic beats of my heart the only sound in the silence. The connection stirred. Kaelus. He had felt my flight, my panic. You are safe. His mental voice was weary. You handled yourself well. She knows, I sent back, my thoughts frantic. Lady Seraphine, she knows I'm more than what you presented me as. She suspects, he corrected, his tone grim. There is a difference. She has no proof. She is a schemer, but she is not a fool. She will not move against a favorite of the king without cause. A favorite? The word felt alien and dangerous on my mental tongue. I felt a flicker of something from him. Frustration, perhaps, at my naivete. That is the role you played tonight. We must continue to play it. It is the only shield we have. A shield? Is that all I was? A piece of armor for a king? Before I could respond, a new sensation bloomed in the bond. It was the wolf. His presence was restless, agitated by the tensions of the evening. I felt him push against Kaelus's control, a raw, protective impulse surging forth. And it was directed at me. A single clear image formed in my mind, not from Kaelus, but from the wolf, an image of me in the midnight blue gown, standing in the alcove, looking lost and afraid. And with the image came a wave of pure, simple emotion. A desire to stand between me and the cold, calculating eyes of the court. A desire to protect. The wolf, at least, saw me as more than a shield. The complexity of it all was overwhelming. The king saw me as a strategic tool. The court saw me as a mystery. The wolf saw me as someone to be protected. And I was just a girl from the borderlands, trapped in a web of power, my heart tangled in a bond that was never meant for me. I slid down to the floor, the beautiful gown pooling around me like a puddle of midnight. I pulled the silver moon mask from my face and stared at it. It had hidden me, but it had also revealed me. The game had changed tonight. The masks were off, and the real battle for the king's throne and for my own survival had just begun. The days after the ball were a study in tense silence. The fortress, now emptied of most of its guests, felt like a held breath. The spectacle was over, but the consequences lingered in the air like gunpowder smoke. I kept to my rooms, the unbolted door at night no longer a temptation. The memory of Lady Seraphine's piercing gaze had turned the gardens from a sanctuary into a potential hunting ground. Kaelus was a distant storm. I felt his presence through the bond, a relentless, grinding focus on matters of state, a deliberate projection of normalcy to quiet the rumors the festival had stirred. But there was a new edge to him. A sharper, more dangerous intensity. The confrontation with Seraphine had been a warning shot, and he was a king who understood the language of threats. My only solace was the wolf, in the deep quiet of the night. When the fortress slept, I would feel his presence stir at the edge of my consciousness. It was not the fierce, protective surge from the ball, but something quieter, more curious. It felt like companionship. One afternoon, as I listlessly turned the pages of a book I wasn't reading, a new sensation bloomed in the void within me. It wasn't an emotion from Kaelus. It was a sound, faint at first, a mere vibration. Like the lowest string of a harp being plucked in a distant room. I sat up, my book forgotten, my entire being focused inward. The hollow ache, my constant companion, seemed to resonate. Then it came again, clearer this time, a low, soft whine, a sound of gentle inquiry. It was the wolf. He wasn't just sending feelings or images anymore. He was trying to speak to the silence inside me. Tears, hot and sudden, filled my eyes. This was impossible. Wolves spoke to their humans, to other wolves, through growls and howls and the mind link they shared. They did not speak to voids. Hello? I thought, the word a fragile. hopeful whisper into the emptiness. The whine softened, transforming into a warm, rumbling purr of acknowledgement. It was a sound of pure contentment, like a great cat settling by a fire. I felt a wave of simple, uncomplicated affection flow from him, and it washed over the barren landscape of my soul like the first rain after a long drought. I spent the rest of the day in a state of awestruck wonder, this secret conversation humming just beneath the surface of my thoughts. The wolf would send a rumble when I was anxious, a soft woof of curiosity when Lyra brought my meal, a low growl of displeasure when I felt a spike of Kaelus's frustration from down the hall. He was my silent, steadfast guardian, a presence where there had only ever been absence. That evening, the connection with Kaelus shifted abruptly. The wall of royal focus crumbled, replaced by a wave of such profound, gut-wrenching sorrow that it stole my breath. It was a clean, sharp pain, entirely different from his usual simmering frustration. This was grief. Kaelus, I sent tentatively, my own heart aching in sympathy. There was no verbal response. Instead, a memory unbidden and raw flooded through the bond from him. Not a thought, but a felt experience. The scent of summer rain on dry earth. The feel of small, sturdy arms wrapped around his neck. The sound of a child's laughter, bright and clear as a bell. A little girl with hair the color of wheat and eyes full of starlight, calling him Papa. Then, the crushing void that followed. The silence where the laughter had been. A loss so immense it had carved a canyon in his soul. It was over as quickly as it came. He slammed his mental shields down, but it was too late. I had seen it. I had felt it. The great alphaking, the unyielding ruler of the Onyx Peak, had once been a father, and he had lost a daughter. I sat in the growing darkness of my room, trembling. The revelation rearranged everything I thought I knew about him. His rage, his impatience, his single-minded focus on his destined mate. It wasn't just about power or duty. It was about a man trying to outrun a bottomless grief. The bond with Luna was to be his redemption. His chance to build a new family, to fill the silence left by the one that was shattered. And I was in the way. The understanding was a physical weight on my chest. His cruelty, his threats, they were the actions of a wounded animal backed into a corner. I was not just a political problem or a magical anomaly. I was personally, deeply standing between a grieving father and his only hope for healing. A soft, questioning whine echoed in the void within me. The wolf had felt my distress. He sent a wave of comfort, a feeling of being surrounded by a worn, furry bulk, a protection against the cold truths of the world. But tonight, even his comfort couldn't fully reach me. The echo of the king's grief was too loud. Later, I heard the bolt on my door slide back. It was late, far later than his usual time for my unlocked freedom. The door opened, and Kaelus stood there. He wasn't wearing his royal attire, just a simple tunic. He looked hollow. The mask of the king was gone, and in its place was just a man, haunted by ghosts. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his stormy eyes filled with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable. The connection was wide open, and I could feel his shame that I had witnessed his vulnerability. Shame for the grief that still had the power to bring a king to his knees. He didn't need to say anything. I understood. "I'm sorry," I whispered into the quiet room. The words were inadequate, but they were all I had. He flinched, as if the sympathy hurt more than the anger ever could. He gave a single shop nod, his jaw clenched tight against any emotion that might escape. Then he did something I never would have expected. He took a step into the room, his gaze falling on the half-finished watercolor on my desk. A painting of the moon over the mountains, a single lonely star beside it. He looked from the painting to me, and in his eyes, I saw a dawning, horrifying realization. He saw his own loneliness reflected back at him in mine. We were two different kinds of broken, our jagged edges catching on each other. Without a word, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. The bolt slid home. But that night, for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a shared space, a quiet understanding between two wounded souls, adrift in the vast, cold palace at the top of the world, each holding a piece of a sorrow that the other could finally, truly understand.